Hey everyone, welcome to part 1 of my drone modeling tutorial series. In this first part we'll be creating the main body and the interface of the drone step by step in Blender. The full tutorial will be split into several parts, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. Also, just a little heads up, I put a lot of time and effort into these videos, and since I'm still not monetized on YouTube, I don't earn anything from them. So if you enjoy my content and want to support me, liking this video, subscribing, or even buying me a coffee would mean a lot and really helps me keep going, so let's dive in. Let's first open a reference image. You can find it in the description below. And we can just place it and also place it in the middle. We can also go to this little image icon and we can just check the opacity and also bring this a bit down. Let's also bring this a bit to the back. Next we can just open a UV sphere and also just scale it, and we can go to X-ray mode so we can match it better to the reference image. It's also very important to rotate the sphere 90 degrees on the y-axis, so R, Y and 90, so that we later can edit these poles to make the wings. Let's go to edit mode and we can also go to top view, and next we can just select all of these vertices and we can just hide them, so just pressing H to hide it. Next we can just select all of these faces so that we can delete them and make this shape. We can just select these vertices and bring them in place, so we have the same shape as the reference image. We can also delete some more faces if we don't need them, and also extrude some edges so we can just match them to the reference. And once we have that, we can just select all of these vertices and just extruding them, so E to extrude and right click and G and Y. Next we can just duplicate this reference image with Shift and D, and we can just place it below so we have the top view. We can go to X-ray mode to see it better and just scaling it until it fits to our model. Let's just make these vertices straight by S, Y and 0, and we can just match it again. Now we can just bring these vertices a bit to the front and just rotating them. As you can see, we have some issues here, so we can hide our subdivision first, and we can just select these faces and delete them. Next we can just select these edges and filling them with F and right click and shade smooth. We can also check the face orientation and see if something is not correct. And if you see it as red, it means it is inside and we have to press Shift and N to correct the normals. Let's select these vertices and we can give it a bevel, change the offset to %, and it looks much better. We can hide our subdivision and holding Ctrl and Shift and selecting these vertices. Next we can just extrude them with E and right click and scaling them on the Z axis, so S and Z. And the same process with the other vertices, so just extruding them and E and right click and then just scaling them on the x-axis, so S and X. and you can hold Shift to select the vertices. Next we can make this vertice straight by Shift and S and cursor to selected, and we can press our period key and change it to 3D cursor. And next we can just press S and Z and 0. We can select these both edges and just F to fill them, and we can do this with the rest as well. So just filling every gap. And here again the same process as before, just Shift and S and cursor to selected, and your period key and change it to 3D cursor and just S, Z and 0. And here we have two vertices overlapping, so we can just cursor to selected and selection to cursor. Selecting everything and M and merge by distance, just in case we have double vertices. And again cursor to selected, and we can extrude that vertex and S, X and 0 and the same below. We can select that whole edge by Alt and Shift and clicking these vertices, and E and Y to bring it to the back. And I decided to slide these vertices by double G. So just pressing double G to slide these vertices, and I think this looks much better. And M and merge by distance. You can also check this icon here and it will automatically merge together. We can give it a loop cut in the middle and bevel it with Ctrl B. Next we can make this panel in the front, and we can add a circle with 6 edges and just placing it according to the reference. And we can fill this face with F and also just scaling it a bit. And next we can just select this edge and E to extrude and right click in scaling it down. And we can let it go and change the gizmo to normal, and we can check these arrows and just moving it. Next we can add a loop cut and scaling it a bit down until it looks more rounded. We can select everything and I to insert. We can select this other edge and the same process, so E to extrude and right click and change the gizmo to normal, and we can bring it forward and scale it down. We can select these both faces and I to insert. And select this edge and E to extrude, and again, just bringing it to the front. We can add 2 loop cuts with Ctrl R, Shift and right click, and we can move the cursor to the circle. And we can add a new circle with 13 vertices and scale it down. As you can see, the circle is not at the place where we want it to be, so we have to select the panel and Shift and S cursor to select it, and next the circle and S, Y and 0. And don't forget to change it back to 3D cursor. So period key and 3D cursor. And we can add another circle and change it to 8 vertices and R, X, 90. And we can bring it in place. And you can rotate it and holding Ctrl so it snaps to the grid. We can select these 3 edges. And we have to rotate it a bit more so it fits to the reference. And we have to make some loop cuts, so let's make 2 loop cuts with Ctrl R. We can activate this magnet tool, so you can select these vertices and double G and move your mouse to the other vertices so it will snap. We can select a circle and F to fill it, so we have a face. And we can select these both edges and E to extrude, and we have to deactivate the magnet and just E to extrude and bring it to the front. And we can make 2 loop cuts on each side with Ctrl R and again our magnet tool and bring it to the same height as the other vertices, so just double G to slide it. And we can grab these 2 vertices and just merging them with the other ones. We can select that edge, extrude it, right click and G and X to move it to the front. Select these both edges and press F to fill it. And next we have to bring all of these faces at the same height. Because of the magnet tool, they move to the back. So just selecting them and move your 3D cursor to this front face and select all of these faces and S, Y and 0. And don't forget to change your pivot point back to 3D cursor. Let's add some loop cuts and we can activate our magnet again and double G and slide it to these vertices. Press G to grab these vertices and move them inwards, and we can also add 1 loop cut with Ctrl R and just moving these vertices around until it fits. And we can also check our subdivision and see how it looks. And next we can just move it to the front. So just grabbing it and G and Y. And let's move these vertices a bit inwards so that they are not sticking out. And here's the same process, just grabbing this edge and extrude it, right click and change your gizmo to normal, and you can move it to the front. And we can add some loop cuts and a circle with 10 vertices and changing the gizmo back to global and rotating it, so R, X and 90. We can just scale it and bring it in place. So just activating the normal again and matching it to the reference. We can rotate it by holding Ctrl so it snaps to the grid. And we can activate our magnet again and just grabbing these vertices and bringing it to the other vertices. And they will merge automatically because we have activated this tool up here. Select these vertices and E to extrude and S to scale it up. And we can select these other vertices and just bringing them out a bit more. We can select these other vertices and extruding them as well. Next, cursor to selected and selection to cursor. And also these 2 vertices, just F to fill them. We can select these faces and delete them, so X and faces. And we can just select these edges with holding Ctrl and Shift and clicking these edges. And just G to grab them and bring them out a bit. Now we can just move this vertex, just grabbing it and moving it until this gap is filled, and also grabbing these other vertices and just moving them inwards so that they are not sticking out. And we can select this vertex and just E to extrude it and F to fill these faces. And if you don't have enough vertices, you can just add a loop cut with Ctrl R and connecting these both edges and just extruding these edges and connecting them. So the same process, just filling these faces, G to grab them and bring them out until we have everything filled, like the reference. We have to add 2 loop cuts to connect these vertices. And also another one. And we can select all of these faces and I to insert. And next we can just right click and loop tools and circle. And if you don't have your loop tools, you can go to edit and preferences and search for loop tools in the add-ons. And next we can just scale this circle and move it to place. And if these vertices are too close together, we have to move them a bit outwards. Select this edge and Ctrl B to give it a small bevel. Select these faces and I to insert. Next we can just select these edges and G to grab them and move them in place so that it fits to the reference. We can select a circle again with our C select and I to insert. We can select the rest of the faces with C again and I to insert them as well. Now we have to select all of these parts that we want to extrude. So just C with our circle select again, or you can just press Alt and Shift and select all of these faces. So just selecting them and later we can extrude it. So E to extrude them just a tiny bit. Next we have to select these faces and extrude them inwards, so we can add a loop cut again. Select one edge and cursor to select it, and we can select these faces and E to extrude and move them inwards. Next we can move our period again to our 3D cursor and change the gizmo to global and S, Y and 0 so that it has the same height as the other faces. And we can select these outer edges and double G. Next we can unhide our subdivision again. Select these faces and E to extrude them inwards. Now we can edit this circle, so E to extrude it. And we can select this outer ring with holding Alt and S to scale it up, so we can match it to the reference. We can select these faces and moving it so that this gap is closed. So change the gizmo to normal and grab this arrow. And we can move it to the circle. And these edges are too close together, so we can double G to slide them. We can select the back faces, so select one middle face and Ctrl plus to grow the selection. And we can X to delete them, because we don't need them. And we can select one middle face and activate your proportional editing and G and Z to grab it and move it a tiny bit to the back. And you can also scroll with your mouse wheel until you have something that you like. Select this edge with holding Alt and Ctrl B to give it a tiny bevel so that we have a bit more details. And E to extrude, right click and Alt and S to scale it inwards. And don't forget to deactivate your proportional editing, and X, and you can delete these faces. And the same process here. So E to extrude, right click and Alt and S and X and faces. And also here again. Add one loop cut and Ctrl B to bevel. And right click and shade smooth. Select the circle and also the outer ring. And E to extrude it just a tiny bit, and you can select the inner ring. And E to extrude it inwards. Select that edge and cursor to select it and open a circle. We can change the gizmo back to global and rotate it, so R, X and 90. And we can just scale it and match it to the reference. And you can also Ctrl A and apply the scale. And you can extrude it and move it on the Y-axis and extrude it again and scale it down. We can select that whole edge with holding Alt and fill it with F and insert again. Add a subdivision surface modifier with Ctrl 2, one loop cut and Ctrl B to bevel, so we have sharper edges. We can select that edge and Ctrl B again, so we have that little gap. We can select this face, so these two faces, and E to extrude. Next we can select these other faces and X to delete them. Now we have to add one loop cut and match it to the height of the other vertices. We can select everything and M and by distance so that these vertices are connected. And we can select these two edges and F to fill them. We can hide our subdivision and select these faces and E to extrude them a tiny bit. We can open a plane and rotate it and match it to the reference. We can give it one loop cut and move it a bit down. We can select that edge and move it inwards. Let's add some more loop cuts and a subdivision surface modifier and a loop cut in the middle and Ctrl B so that we have sharper edges. And we can change the bevel offset to 2% so that the faces are not intersecting. Shade smooth. We can extrude the eye inwards. And we forgot to extrude these two faces, so let's extrude them. We can delete these faces. And also the ones who are on the inside. And next we can cursor to select it and select these vertices S, Y and 0. And again cursor to select it and extrude right click and S, Y and 0. And the same process with the other face. And again, if you have an extra face in the middle, you can just delete it, so X and faces. The next step would be to bevel all the edges. So we can go to select and select sharp edges. We can press C for our circle select, and you can press the middle mouse button so we can deselect the edges that we don't need. So let's deselect all the edges that we don't want to bevel. And don't forget to change the miter outer to arc. We can activate our knife tool with pressing K on our keyboard and just dragging these lines so that we have all quads and no n-gons. Here we can just slide these edges with double G and they will connect automatically. We see we have these artifacts, so we have to activate our knife tool again and just dragging a line with A you can make them straight and J to connect these vertices until these artifacts are gone. We can add a circle with 5 vertices and fill this face. And let's add a array modifier and we can give this some thickness, so extruding it and bringing it out on the y-axis and also filling this face. Ctrl 2 to give it a subdivision and we can scale this inner face down. And also bringing it out a bit so that we have a round shape and shading it smooth. Next we can add a empty plane axis and set the target as the empty. Go to edit mode and move the circle to the side. Move the cursor to the plane axis, so Shift S cursor to select it. Select the circle and right click and set origin to 3D cursor so that the origin is in the middle, and we can select the empty and just rotate it. Increase the number of the array and just matching it to the reference. We can select another circle and move it to the middle. And also remove the array modifier because we don't need it. Select another cube. So just placing it in edit mode and extruding it. Cursor selected and you can select these edges and S, Y and 0. Set cursor to the other side and the same process, so S, Y and 0. We can add a subdivision and a loop cut and bevel. And fill this front face and I to insert and I to insert again. And right click shade smooth. We can just Shift D to copy it and move it to the other side. That's it for part 1. I hope you enjoyed modeling the drone's body and interface with me. In the next part we'll move on to the wings, weapons and the eye, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. And if you found this helpful, please consider liking this video or supporting me on Ko-fi. It really helps me keep making these tutorials. And thanks for watching and see you in the next part.